Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to completely dismantle your intuitive understanding of space-time. Seriously, we're replacing it with a totally mind-bending paradigm shift drawn straight from thermodynamic projection theory. If you've ever found yourself staring at the night sky wondering why time only moves forward, or, why the universe even exists at all, well, buckle up. This framework connects those massive mysteries into one incredibly coherent and frankly startling sequence. Let's get into it. So, let's start by challenging the core assumption almost every single one of us has. We usually picture the universe as this massive pre-existing container, right? A place where things just happen. We think of space-time as the stage, and the stars, planets, and us humans as the actors walking around on it. But what if we flip that entirely? What if space-time isn't the container at all? What if space and time are actually the generated byproduct of a much deeper, underlying thermodynamic process? Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through the grand illusion, the equilibrium bath, thermodynamic debt, space-time as bookkeeping, and finally, the final repayment. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the grand illusion, or what the theory calls the ontological inversion. Let's just look at these two fundamental realities side by side for a second. On the standard view, you've got this jar of space-time where energy just sort of moves around inside. But the thermodynamic projection theory, or TPT for short, completely inverts this whole picture. It argues that persistent thermodynamic processing is actually the foundational reality. Space-time doesn't exist independently. It is simply the generated stable record of that processing. It's a huge shift. The universe isn't a place containing a process. It is a process that creates the illusion of a place. Now, to understand where this cosmic processing actually begins, we have to step entirely outside of time. That brings us to part 2, the equilibrium bath. In this theory, base reality is known as the bath, and its natural default state is perfect equilibrium. But we immediately run into a flatlander limitation here. Because our human brains are entirely wired for a 3D universe, we desperately want to imagine the bath as some giant physical ocean that our universe is just floating around inside. But that's not right. The bath has absolutely zero geometric dimensions and no clock. Words we use like outside or before just mean logical priority here. They do not mean physical space or literal seconds. Then, out of nowhere, that perfect foundation is completely shattered. Some unknown event, causally external to the bath, introduced an enormous disturbance. Now, the theory doesn't pretend to know what caused this cosmic lightning strike, but it starts with this absolute pre-geometric crisis. The bath was violently driven away from its natural equilibrium, creating a staggering, almost unimaginable amount of unresolved potential. But the bath didn't just sit there. Its restorative capacity was completely overwhelming. It reacted instantly to this massive disturbance, with a near total restorative recoil. The theory informally calls this immediate snap reaction the snatchback. Almost the entire chaotic disturbance was immediately reclaimed and smoothed right back out into perfect equilibrium. The scale of what happened here is truly humbling. Look at this. Essentially, 99.9999% of the disturbance was instantly reclaimed, gone. But because the initiating event was just so sudden, a tiny microscopic fraction avoided immediate recovery. That tiny sliver you see escaping, that unrecovered residue is the entire mass energy of our observable universe. Literally everything you have ever known or will know is just the leftover rounding error of a nearly perfect cosmic cleanup. So, how in the world does that tiny leftover residue build the reality we experience? Let's move to part 3, thermodynamic debt. This outstanding disequilibrium, this leftover energy, is what the theory calls thermodynamic debt. And you can think of it exactly like a giant discharging battery. This debt is literally the only reason our universe has a capacity for change. It acts simultaneously as the universe's fuel, its forward arrow of time, and its ultimate lifespan. As long as there's unresolved debt left in the battery, the universe has to exist to process it. But here's the catch. Not every tiny disturbance gets to become a whole universe. Most of them just dissolve right away. To survive, this escaping debt has to cross what's called a persistence threshold. First, the residue has to survive long enough to interact with itself. Next, those interactions have to generate self-organizing feedback loops. And crucially, they have to develop memory, meaning earlier states actively constrain the later states. Once it can maintain these distinctions faster than the bath can dissolve them, boom, a self-organizing open system is officially born. Now that this self-organizing system exists, how does the physical universe actually emerge from it? That brings us to section 4, spacetime as bookkeeping.
Okay, this is where things get truly wild. Spacetime is not a void waiting to be filled. Spacetime is simply the universe's internal bookkeeping system. Because this thermodynamic residue is constantly interacting and building a complex history, it needs a way to organize all those retained changes. Space is simply the stable relation among the persistent parts. Geometric time is just the accumulation of those state changes. So spacetime isn't the ledger book itself, it's literally just the ink on the page.
Because spacetime is just bookkeeping, we have to separate the concept of time into two completely different things. Intrinsic time is the actual amount of foundational processing happening, way down at the bath level. Geometric time, on the other hand, is the clock-like sequence written into the projected record. It's the time we physically experience every day. This means the bath might perform trillions of years of intrinsic processing, while barely a second of geometric time ticks by on our cosmic clocks, which is especially true in the early universe. Now, this continuous restorative process acting on the residue is called the cleaner, and it operates in phases. It starts with a primordial spike of extreme intrinsic processing. Then we hit a phase called the viscous eraser, which strongly suppresses any wildly unstable irregularities. What manages to survive that is known as crackle. That's the limited residual texture from which all our galaxies and cosmic structures eventually develop. Finally, there's a long kinetic tail, which might actually be exactly what we observe today as late-time cosmic acceleration, or what we often call dark energy. Under this theory, standard physics is beautifully recontextualized. Matter isn't just permanent stuff. It's actually delayed restoration. It's thermodynamic debt held in a stable configuration. Particles? They're simply modes of survival that manage to withstand the cleaner. And life itself? Well, biological complexity isn't some magical rebellion against entropy. Life is just an incredibly advanced, highly active system for detecting and exhausting thermodynamic gradients. From a blazing star to a human being, we are all unified by this exact same cosmic function.
Which means we have to follow this discharging battery to its natural, inevitable conclusion. Our final section, the final repayment.
Because the universe is an open system built entirely on debt, standard internal heat death isn't the whole story. Simply smoothing things out inside the universe just isn't enough. The energy sustaining the projection must eventually return and completely reintegrate into the bath. As the thermodynamic debt finally approaches zero, the very conditions that sustain the projection of spacetime simply begin to disappear. But wait, what happens to all of our history? Does it just vanish? Well, the bath doesn't have a conscious memory. It's not going to preserve a geometric archive or a video of our galaxies or our lives. But the fine-grained information isn't lost. The bath remembers the universe because the exact final equilibrium state it returns to is microscopically altered by having processed our specific universe. So the information does survive, just as highly scrambled, delocalized echoes in the bath. And that leads us directly to this incredibly profound realization. The universe exists to remove the reason the universe exists. The cosmos operates solely to eliminate the disequilibrium that birthed it in the first place. When that debt finally hits zero, there's no more active matter, and there is no continued production of time. Spacetime itself just ceases to exist, because spacetime was only ever part of the machine. Successful operation is literally the shutdown mechanism. Leaving you with that bit of existential awe, I really want you to consider what this ontological inversion truly means. If our entire vast, billions of years old spacetime is just the temporary, self-eliminating shadow of a microscopic thermodynamic residue, what other exceptional disturbances might have crossed that threshold? What other unfathomable residues might be out there organizing themselves, casting entirely different geometric shadows in the dark? It is absolutely a staggering perspective on the nature of reality. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.